going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker while we're getting everything lined up here. He is Tim Davis. And for those of you who don't know him, Tim he's my contact at the Georgia Nurses Association. So whenever we do anything related to working with the Nurses Association or lobbying or any of those sorts of things, it's through working with Tim that we've been able to make the advances that we've made with getting our bills introduced, and then the incremental steps that we've made along the way towards smoke legislation. Tim,
we have a clicker. Yep.
He's been with the Georgia Nurses Association since 2016, and he's the Senior Director of Membership and Government Affairs now. The other thing about Tim, and I think it's important to know what people do outside their job, he's a father with 3 kids, and a lot of times when I'm calling him, he's in the dropout line at school to drop them off or pick them up. And I wanted him to come to you to talk to you today to tell you how important it is for us to not only partner with our legislators, but also be a part of GNA, partner with GNA. It's like AORN is working for you, whether you're a member or not. GNA is working for us, whether we are members or not. And so better that we should be part of the big group. So Tim, please come on up and share your.
Thank you. Y'all hear me? Had I known the presentation before me, I would have thrown some Earth, Wind, and Fire at the front of my presentation or something like that, you know? Good walk-up music or something. You know, when I first did something like this and presented to a group, I was honored to have my mother in the crowd with me there. And I thought I did really, really well. I was fresh out of college. I was maybe 22, 23. When I got off the stage, I went and talked to her. I said, Mom, you think it went great? And she said, son, you were blessed with a lot of talents. I love you to death. Height ain't one of them. You need to do everything you can to not try to stand behind one of those podiums if you can help it for the rest of your life. So I do move around a lot. Gee, thanks, Mom, right? But I wanted to tell y'all a little bit, just for a second, talk to you a little bit about the Georgia Nurses Association, talk about utilizing your voice as operating room nurses for change and for the advancement of your profession. And so just a little bit about, if this is working, if it isn't, I'll do this. I don't know how to advance the slide. There we go. I'll just do it that way. Just a little bit about GNA. What is GNA? We're the largest organization representing professional nurses in the state of Georgia. We were founded in 1907, and we represent nurses in all areas of practice. And that's important to underscore, because in the political game, obviously there's strength in numbers, right? The nursing profession is the second most populous profession to teachers in the entire state. And so if we're able to coalesce messaging and get behind a particular issue, we curry a lot of political favor. We exist to be a forum for all issues impacting nursing, both professionally and personally. And our goal is to partner with specialty groups like AORN in order to present a unified cadre of nurses in a collaborative resolution, speaking together as one voice, with one voice, about what we can do to advance the nursing profession. And so we've been doing that again since 1907. We are an affiliate of the American Nurses Association, which is the organization that represents you federally. And each one of the 50 states has a state nurses association. We are the one for Georgia. A little bit about our history since at least I've been at GNA in 2017. We passed the legislation that enabled Georgia to enter into the Nurse Licensure Compact, which obviously lets you take your license and have reciprocity in the other compact states around the country. 2019, that's not an acronym. NADA means nothing. And I put that in there because it's an important distinction to make. I think a lot of times as advocates, one of the most important things that I have to guard against is frustration, because everything in the political process is very slow moving. Very rarely do you bring something and in the first legislative session that you bring it, it's accomplished and you can put a pin in it and move on to something else. And that's something that as advocates, as nurses working at the bedside and academia can be very frustrating, because I understand that there's a certain level of passion that's tied to whatever it is that you're championing, right? And it's all about getting our legislators to see, exactly what it is that we think it is that needs to be done. And that's not always an easy thing to do. So it's not unlikely that there are entire sessions where we aren't able to advance one piece of legislation or another that we're specifically trying to move. But I think every legislative session has its value, right? And it's really in the touches that we're able to make, the interactions that we're able to have with legislators, and the relationships that we're able to cultivate while we're doing that work. And so then we came back in 2019. The GNA Peer Assistance Program is actually an alternative to discipline program for nurses who self-identify as having a substance abuse issue. It's a way for them to get the treatment and monitoring that they need without having their license revoked. It goes into a suspension status until they're able to get over a set amount of hurdles and get back on the road to sobriety. Up until 2019, that program was fully funded by the Georgia Nurses Foundation. And so there existed no real state buy-in in trying to ensure that our nurses are taken care of and get the best care possible. In 2019, we were able to secure $150,000 in the state budget. We were really grateful for that. For those of you who have ever precepted or service preceptors, you know that there's a finite list of slots available to students to be able to precept. So the Preceptor Tax Incentive program was something that we worked on in 2019 to be able to incentivize that unpaid work of precepting students, right? Open up more slots, get more students out of the classroom and off to the bedside and treating patients in our communities. We actually played defense on an initiative by veterinary technicians to reclassify as veterinary nurses. Obviously, we want to be guarding and protective of the term nurse and all that goes into being a nurse. And so we were able to, a lot of times on legislative issues, it's a lot easier to organize around something that people don't want than it is that it's something that people actually do want. And so this was one that we were able to garner a lot of support for the defeat of that particular legislation. 2020, we worked with a coalition of organizations to pass postpartum Medicaid coverage for an additional 6 months up to a full year now. For mothers that qualify, aimed directly at Georgia's, very low maternal mortality rate relative to the other states in the country. We passed our first APRN scope of practice advancement in that APRNs can now do radiographic imaging ordering in life-threatening situations, and that's something that we'll continue to work on and continue to kind of whittle away at until we're one of those full practice authority states. And then the creation in 2020 of our Senate Study Committee on surgical smoke. And so a number of you in the room today were able to present towards that study committee. I think we got some favorable recommendations out of that committee. And I think we're in a good shape now with having bills in both the House and the Senate to move forward in the next legislative session. So I'm really excited about that as well. In 2020, we were able to have your home addresses. So prior to the 2020 session, anybody with your first and last name could go on the Secretary of State's website, put it in, and by virtue of that, have access to whatever address you use to obtain your license, whether it be your home address. A lot of nurses I know utilize their employer's address or post office boxes for this very reason. And we view that as obviously a public safety issue for our practitioners. And so now that information is viewed as confidential. Someone can still enter your first and last name and make sure that you have a valid license. And we always want the public to be able to have that kind of transparency. But for them to have the home address or any address really is a bridge too far, we thought, and we were very excited to be able to get that removed. And then we obviously came back in 2022 and made sure that our peer assistance program funding was included in the 2022 budget. This year we'll be working to try to get those funds engrossed so that we don't have to come back every year and ensure that it's in the budget. So that's on our list of things to do. for 2022. And so just to let you know, that was just to let you know a little bit over the last, 3 to 4 years of things that we've worked on and tried to accomplish for the nursing profession, for the advancement of the nursing profession, to make the state of Georgia a better place for nurses to work and practice and live with their families. Now, I like to use this diagram, especially when I'm talking to legislators, because what it is that we champion always has to be patient focused, patients at the center of what it is that we do as nursing professionals. And everything else kind of radiates out from that patient perspective. And so you've got registered nurses, you've got specialty organizations, much like AORN, you've got the academia community, and then you've also got your, what I like to call tangential stakeholders. And I'll talk a little bit about them in a few slides here, but it's really anybody else who stands to benefit from the passage of our legislation, right? So it's everybody else when speaking about smoke evacuation that works in the OR all day with you, the nurses. It's patients themselves. It's doctors, even though they may be a little reticent or hesitant to use the equipment. Sometimes they need that extra kick. But at the end of the day, they are exposed to the smoke as well, even if not for as long as an extended period of time. And these are all people that stand to benefit from anything that we get done. And we try to work together and partner with these 4 quadrants to present to legislators something that's patient focused and will help their constituents ultimately at the end of the day. These are some of the partners that we've collaborated with over the many, many years, or at least the last 4 years, as we work to pass legislation. And you'll see various patient advocacy groups, schools of nursing, hospitals themselves, and other professional healthcare profession organizations that we've worked with and partnered with directly to pass legislation. And that's really, really vital, because it's key to letting a legislator know that they're not only servicing our interests, but the interests of the greater community at large. I just wanted to talk very briefly about the difference between an advocate and an activist, because at GNA, we really want to be, there's an old adage in politics that if you're not at the table, inevitably you're going to end up on the menu, right? And we really want to be that organization that is giving nurses the opportunity to be at the table when laws are written and discussed and advanced that dictate how we live our lives. We want to have a seat at the table. We want nursing to be represented. And so we really try to focus on being in the business of training advocates. So people who plead their cause or a cause of another, one who defends or maintains a cause, like we did in the title defense of the word nurse itself, and then one who supports or promotes the interests of a cause or group. Advocates differ slightly from activists, because activists are people who use supports or strong actions, such as public protest in support or opposition of one side or the other of an issue. And that's not to say that activists don't have a position or a place, a part to play in the overall political process. I very much so believe that they do. But we want to be on the inside of the Capitol, actually working while our laws are being crafted and governed, to inject nursing and the nursing perspective into that conversation. And so we 1000% want to train advocates. When there's a time for activists, I think they're 100% necessary. But from a GNA perspective, we want you to be on the inside of the Capitol and getting to know your legislators on a personal level, letting them know and becoming the subject matter experts for them about what needs to take place as they're reviewing legislation. And so again, advocacy, just to dive a little bit deeper into that term, it's the active support or recommendation of a cause, idea, policy, or piece of legislation. It's always needs and evidence-based in its assessment. And so we try to do everything that we can to put information in front of legislators that's worthwhile for them, that's rooted in fact, and that will help educate them, understanding that the lion's share of our General Assembly don't come from the medical field at all. You know, they're farmers and lawyers. They are realtors, car salesmen. They come from all different walks of life, and they come to the Capitol, but they make very, very important decisions about healthcare and everything else. So we want to present ourselves as evidence-based proponents of truth, and resources to them as such. Grassroots organization, the unfortunate thing, we have legislators, and there'll be some here in a little bit, who come before us and say, you should elect me and you should put me into office. I want to be a steward of your desires and what you like to see get done in your life. And when I get there, I'm going to have an open door policy, and I'll meet with anybody about what it is that concerns you in your community. And far too often, and often than not, that's exactly what happens. The legislator gets elected. They go down to the Gold Dome in the Capitol. They go to their office. Their door is open, but very few people come through it. And so every time I'm interacting with nurses who may be new to political advocacy, I always tell them, a small group of really dedicated, really devoted constituents for a legislator can really move the needle one way or another for them on a specific position, because so few people actually do it. A group of 10 to 20 that live in their district and have the ability to vote for them may be the only people that they hear from on a specific issue that may not be polarizing and in the news and things like that. And so grassroots organization is 100% vital. It's key towards any advocacy movement. And it's really easy to do when you think, I really only need to put together a group of 5 to 10 of my colleagues or my friends who are willing to send an email or make a phone call, or maybe come have coffee with me one time with a legislator and just talk to them a little bit about our perspective and where we're coming from. Coalition building, again, we try very hard to engage those tangential stakeholders, those partners who stand to benefit from the advancement of our cause other than us ourselves. And that's really, that makes that grassroots organization even more impactful. Campaigning, during campaigning season, it's important to know where the candidates stand on issues that are important to you. But it entails a very next step by not only simply knowing the issues and where they stand, but offering to say, hey, I'll show up on a Thursday evening and make phone calls for you if you like. Or I'll show up when you're door knocking a neighborhood, my neighborhood specifically, and take a few flyers and hand them out and talk to my neighbors about, who I know you to be and why I think you're a good candidate. And that really, really goes a long way for a political candidate, especially at the state level. If their election isn't, a part or on ballot with the national election or statewide election, there very well may be the difference between 20 to 50 to 100 votes. That's the difference between them taking the seat in office or continuing to hold that office, or losing the race. And so, offering yourself to be a resource for them during campaigning is always a great way to cultivate a relationship with your specific legislator for you to be able to leverage later on. It's becoming more and more impactful, social and traditional media engagement. If you have a Twitter, if you have an Instagram, I would encourage you to follow and like your legislators' pages. Tweet at them and talk to them on social media. It's a great way for your grassroots network to participate and give them a light lift action item to do, to say, hey, I just posted this and I tagged our legislator. Can you go like it or comment under it and just indicate your support? Opinion editorials and letters to the editor in your local publications, I guarantee you your elected officials pay attention to their local paper, whether it's here in Metro Atlanta in the AJC or back home, wherever you're from around Georgia. It's a great opportunity for you to speak on exactly how you feel on a given issue or another, and to also make yourself available as a grassroots organizer in your community to anybody else who may feel exactly it is the same way that you do. Political donations, obviously, there's a money aspect that's tied to politics as well. And much like campaigning, that those dollars really help your candidate be able to get their word out. And if you don't know who to contribute to, there's the Georgia Nurses Political Action Committee that we have formed that you can donate to, and it's designed to directly impact. We have a board of directors that is comprised of all nurses, and we only give money to candidates who are friendly to nursing on nursing friendly issues. Now, there is a distinction that you have to draw between advocating and advocacy and grassroots organizing and direct lobbying. And lobbying in itself are those face-to-face interactions at the Capitol during legislative session. And every legislative session, my number one goal is to get at least 100 new nurses down to the Capitol during those 40 days of legislative session to interact with their legislator and other legislators on any one of our issues. We have our Nurses Day at the Capitol, which some of you are familiar with that, and I've seen you there. But every other day of the 40-day session, I try to have either a school of nursing with nursing students or individual nurses down there interacting with their legislators. And to a person every day in those 40 days, one or two nurses will approach me and say, I really never knew it was this easy just to come down and show my ID and come in and talk to my legislator about this. And I always tell them, don't limit it to what you talk to them about today. If you have an issue in your community, if there's something going on, don't be afraid or hesitant to reach out to your elected official. Be the one that's going through that open door that they promised you that they'd have down at the state capitol if they were elected. And then we have calls and emails. I'm sure you're all familiar with the calls to action that come out during legislative session. Please, please, please take advantage of those. Again, a good organized group of 10 to 20 who is committed to sending those emails and making those phone calls when they come from Brenda or AORN or GNA can really move the needle one way or another for a legislator, especially if you're emailing that legislator and you say, hey, I live in your district. I live at this address in your district, so they can familiarize themselves with exactly where you are in the district. And many times you'll receive an email or a phone call back. And so just be ready and prepared to, again, present, what to be the facts and the truth around an issue. But those are really, really impactful during legislative session when they go out. So please take advantage of those calls to action when you see them. Social media engagement during session is great. It's always good to be able to say, our bill is up on the House floor today, and I'd love to see how whomever votes on it. And I'm watching. It just lets them know in the back of their mind when they're getting ready to press the button, yay or nay, that there are people back home in their district that are paying attention to where they come down on issues that matter most to them. And then another great tool, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier, is in-person meetings with your legislator outside of legislative session. Now, elected officials won't tell you, but the number one goal of an elected official is to get reelected, right? They want to stay in office. Well, 9 times out of 10, they get there when they're first elected and they realize what I touched on earlier, how slow moving the political process really is, how difficult it is to get one thing or another really passed. So all of the ideas that they first came into office with, they understand when it's time to get reelected, they probably haven't accomplished nearly half of the things that they set out to, right? And so I've got to get reelected in order to stay here and continue this work and make sure that what I'm passionate about and what I told all the people back home that I would get done actually gets done. And so that's why an invitation to an in-person meeting, hey, I've got 5 of my coworkers. We all live in your district. I'd love to meet you at the local Starbucks for a cup of coffee and just talk with you about some things that we're passionate about. Is invaluable, and 9 times out of 10, if they can fit it in their schedule, they'll always say yes, because what is it for them? It's a great opportunity for you to get to know them a little better, to learn about who they are as a person and what they're passionate about, and to hopefully for them win your vote and all your friends vote when you talk to them about how wonderful they were when you got to interact with them. So outside of legislative session, I would encourage you all, you can go to www.openstates.org. You can plug in your address. It will tell you all of your elected officials from your county and city commission all the way up to your representatives and senators in Washington, D.C. And I would encourage you to reach out to them all via email and say, I'd love to chat with you just for a second if you got time. Obviously, the higher you go up in the chain, the more they're inundated with requests like that. But I will guarantee you, 1 or 2 calls to your local legislator at the state level, and you'll at least get a call back, if not a meeting. So it's not very difficult to do that, and it's a great way to start that conversation, so that then during legislative session, when you come and you pull them off on the rope line, and you've only got 2 minutes to talk to them, you can say, "Hey, remember me? I put together that group. We met at the Starbucks. It was a great time. Let me tell you a little bit about why you should vote yes on this piece of legislation that you'll be considering today." And really, that's where we want to get to as advocates. We want our legislators soliciting our input and our feedback whenever there's a healthcare related piece of legislation that comes across their desk. To say, I'm going to call Brenda or Tram or Vanjie and see how they feel about it and how it'll impact them specifically, and let their feedback guide what it is that I decide to do ultimately. Always remember, and I try to harp on this, courtesy is always the best policy, right? Remembering that meeting with your elected officials in the off season, the goal is not to get to them to commit one way or another. It's rather for the two of you just to make a connection, right? So that you know each other. There's some tie that binds that will allow you to create a long-lasting interaction with that specific legislator. Always thank them for their time and attention, obviously, after you all have met. Offer yourself and your network as a resource to them as they review legislation. Again, that's a great place to be as an advocate when you've earned that trust and you've presented yourself as a truth speaker first and foremost. And now that legislator is reaching out to you and saying, how do you feel about this? How should I vote one way or the other, especially when they're not in healthcare? And then follow up with them after your meeting, or if they take a vote on a piece of legislation that you talked to them about, send them an email and say, hey, I really appreciate the way that you voted, the fact that you heard what I had to say, and it means a whole lot to me. Those kinds of really courtesy touch points really go a long way with legislators, and really stand to ingratiate you as you move forward. And then always remember truth. There are no permanent friends or enemies in politics, right? So just because a specific legislator isn't with you or for your stance on one issue doesn't mean they can't be helpful to you on another, right? And so what we try to do is make sure that we stick to the reason that we're there to advocate at that particular moment, and try to make sure that they're representing our interests like such. And then it's incumbent upon us to ensure that they're working to represent us as there's Senator Brass just walked in there. How are you doing? We are the ones that put them in the office, right? And like I said, they represent our interests. Open States, so OPEN States, plural with an S, .org. It's a really, really good resource and tool for you all as advocates. Again, not only you, but anybody can plug their address into that website. It'll show you who your legislators are, from your local legislators all the way up to your legislators in DC. It'll allow you to learn a little bit about some of the legislation that they've sponsored and championed specifically. And it'll also allow you to see how they voted on one piece of legislation or another if you're looking for something specific. So it's a great advocacy tool and resource for you as you do the work of advocating and advocacy. And last but not least, all politics is local. I love this picture because I think it really encapsulates what I try to make real for people when they're coming to the Capitol or they're thinking about political advocacy in any way, shape, or form. Most of the work, most people don't see, right? The people who get the calls to action, or they're just, members and they've signed up and they've indicated that they're with us by virtue of paying their membership dues, but they may not be the ones that are on the Zoom calls or meeting specifically with the legislators. They represent the hands that are underground that everybody doesn't see, right? They are a resource in and unto themselves to the process, even if they aren't the ones actually meeting with the legislator. And so encourage your colleagues to become members of AORN if they already aren't, to become members of GNA if they already aren't, because their membership in and of itself allows folks like me and the people who have a little bit extra time to be able to go down to say, we're 20, 30, 40,000 nurses strong when we come here and we tell you that we want to see something happen. And ultimately, we can move the needle one way or the other when it's time to vote. I alluded to the teaching profession a little bit earlier, and one thing that they've done a really, really good job is they almost indoctrinate when you're in education, the College of Education and College Association membership. They have done a great job of making it clear to teachers that association membership really is the lifeblood of your association. And it's no coincidence that every teacher in the state of Georgia still has access to a pension program, right? Where all of us are playing into a 401k or an IRA. It's because, you know, they've done a good job of standing together, of coalescing their messaging, and they present a unified block of voters and constituents whenever they want to get something done. And there's no reason why nursing can't be the same. So I'd encourage y'all, visit our website. You can Google Georgia Nurses. For any of you who need my contact information, it's tim.davis@georgianurses.org. That's Georgia spelled out, nurses plural with an S. And, you know, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to come and talk to you a little bit about advocacy. We just started last year our Georgia Nurses Association Legislative Institute, which is a more comprehensive deep dive into community organizing, into direct level lobbying and advocacy, but then also candidacy as well, because I'd love to have a lot more nurse legislators under the Gold Dome as well. So if it's something that you're interested in, if you ever thought, maybe I can run for office or something that I like to do, I'd encourage you to look into that. Our second cohort will be starting in December, and we'll work through the legislative session in 2022. But I really, really appreciate the opportunity to come before you today to talk to you a little bit. I hope you've had a great time and it's been very educational for you here at this conference. One of my good friends from college is actually getting married at 4 p.m. downtown, so I'm going to run and throw a tuxedo on and try to make it there. Or otherwise, I would stick around with you all. But thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you all hopefully at the Capitol in 2022, and we could get our surgical smoke evacuation legislation done. Thanks.